Okay, this video is Best Christian Art. We're going to start on page 321. This is the book that I wrote, Best Christian Art. So the painting Charon Crossing the River Styx by Joachim Potnier. So Charon is the ferryman who takes the souls from what's left of the world, if you will, to the other side, to hell. Okay. And here's more of a close-up painting, and this one is an illustration from the Divine Comedy by Alexander Litovenko. And I write on the Russian artists just because I think it's funny that Russia used to have so many really good artists back in the 1800s, and then once they went, atheist in the 1900s, they stink. They stink at anything creative or aesthetic, other than the things that mock them, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, for example, or Boris Pasternak with Dr. Zhivago. So anyways, in this one, you can see Dante is with Virgil looking out over the poor souls being ferried across the river Styx. And so here's now Dante and Virgil are on the boat themselves. And you can just see how miserable and sad it is, the damned. Okay, and Dante himself, in a sense, had been exiled. He was exiled. He was exiled out of Florence because he fell out of political disagreement with the rulers of Florence. And a lot of the best books are written by people who are in exile, including this one. There's a lot of great illustrations for it, and I'm only including the old ones here, but the contemporaries are magnificent, contemporary artists that have illustrated this. Here's Dante and Virgil. They see Paolo and Francesca. So basically Francesca, she cheated on her husband, he cheated on his friend, and a man and a woman, if, you're attracted to each other, you're attracted to each other. So if you think you might be attracted to somebody who you shouldn't be, the smart move is just stay away from them. That's the truth, okay? Because otherwise, problems might arise. Okay, here is Dante and Virgil in the Ninth Circle of Hell by Gustave Doré from 1861. And Gustave Doré was really a magnificent artist. You most often think of him with his black and white drawings, which are great, but his color paintings are fantastic. So here is The Plains of Heaven by John Martin, 1851, the English artist. And I put to go with it some really nice songs, like Walk It Off by Bach. Sounds like Walk It Off. BWV 1056 and violins, magnificent. It's beautiful. It's like the music of heaven. Jesus Joy, Man's Desiring by Bach, sung by John McCormick, the Irish tenor. It's great. Alleluia Chorus by Handel from Handel's Messiah. It's just magnificent. It's beautiful. I really like I Know My Redeemer Liveth. That's all wonderful stuff. Rushing Wind by Keith Green, great song. Carol of the Bells by Librera, it's beautiful. Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, it's a very good song. So anyways, that's another great thing about Christianity. The art ties in with the music, ties in with the scripture, in part because it all goes together. The art was made initially to educate the ignorant, illiterate masses. Okay, and one can kind of see there's a difference between Catholicism and Protestantism here in the sense that Catholicism, there tended to be more illiterate people, and they also, Catholicism, I think, though, is more tied into the whole school of Christianity coming out of the ancient Greeks, then the ideas of Aristotle, then the ideas of Thomas Aquinas, and the Renaissance. That's all part of Catholic Christianity. Versus the Protestant stream of Christianity largely came out of Plato. Nietzsche called Christianity Platonism for the masses, through sort of the advisors of the Medici. Some of them were very much into Plato. And then through Martin Luther. And it tended to be more Bible thumping, by the book. They don't celebrate the saints. They don't celebrate the Virgin Mary. So it's a little bit more bleak, as Alfred North Whitehead said. He said, the Protestant Reformation is one of the biggest mistakes in the history of the world and religion, because he felt it was just so bleak. And Carl Jung had pointed out the same thing, that without the saints and Mary, you lose a big part of what's joyful, the aesthetic beauty of Catholic Christianity. But still, the basic message of Jesus doesn't change. Love thy neighbor, be nice to each other, and it makes the world a better place, because before the Christians came along, it was sort of like the mentality of the Romans, which is just brutal and harsh. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, tit for tat, the Montagues and the Capulets, endless feuding and conflicts. Versus Christianity can say, hey, forgive thy neighbor, love thy neighbor, give the other person a chance, give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's learn how to work together. St. Peter, he's sort of talked about without love, I'm nothing. St. Paul said the same thing. So Christianity really pushed the idea of love in mankind on a big scale, and forgiveness. And that had been talked about in Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz, the Polish writer, that great novel book. He said that the ancient Greeks were the best to get the world aware of poetry and philosophy, the ancient Romans of law and of power, and the early Christians sort of taught the world on a big scale the benefit of societal love and kindness and forgiveness to just smooth things over and get along. And it's beautiful. Okay, here is Savonarola from the 1490s, preparing for the bonfire of the vanities, trying to get people to give up their possessions, not be so materialistic. And he was really admired. He was admired by Martin Luther. He was greatly admired by Michelangelo, the greatest artist who ever lived. He was greatly admired by Sandro Botticelli, the greatest painter of the 1400s, him and Rogier van der Weyden. And, they even did some crazy stuff. Botticelli destroyed some of his paintings because he got so enthused and caught up in the emotion of the speeches by Savonarola. And I've also heard a good expression somewhere else, I think it was from Bishop Barron, that basically a movement has gone bad when they start destroying beautiful things. I mean, if Botticelli's destroying a painting, that's not good, that's crazy, okay? But Savonarola, really captivated a lot of the people of Florence. And the Renaissance gets exaggerated as being this entire secular return to the classics, the ancient ways of the ancient Greeks and Romans. The Medicis were relatively secular compared to a lot of the people in Italy in the time of the Renaissance, versus most of Italy and most of Europe was still extremely religious. By our modern standards, over the top religious. So I say that because the Medici had some secular philosophers and scholars who worked for them, who were helping them to translate books from the ancient Greeks and Romans, but it was still intensely religious, as you can get from people following Savonarola. And Michelangelo, for example, was much more religious than is widely acknowledged. I mean, his favorite book was Dante. He was a member of one of the religious orders, too. Religious orders would have, the priests, and monks, but they'd also have a secular order of people that were closely devoted to them and followed them. Okay, now we're going to get into some of the saints. We're starting out with St. Augustine, and here he is with his mother Monica, taking him to school. St. Augustine was a very bright guy. He was a scholar of rhetoric, and so he could write well, and he knew how to think, and there's some good things about him. Like I said, he's a little bit too dry and took us down the path of Protestantism, but there's some good things about him. I like the conversion scene. This one's painted by Fra Angelico in 1430, where Augustine, the teacher of rhetoric, who really loved the books of Cicero, was also wondering about where he's going from a religious point of view, and he heard a voice while he's out in his garden saying, "Tolle legi, pick up and read, pick up and read." So he picked up the Bible and opened it to the page, and it said Romans 13:13, and it said, "Let us walk properly in the day and not spend the nights in drunkenness and orgy." And he converted at that moment. So a pretty dramatic conversion scene, one of the most dramatic. Here's Augustine now, inspired by the fire of truth, Veritas, with Christianity, and he's going to write and teach. So I like that. He became one of the doctors of the church. I like the fact that he wrote City of God about, the path and the hope and the blessing of Christianity, and that it may continue during the time of chaos, the city of God, where Rome is being sacked and destroyed. And in a sense, we live in something very much like that today. In a way, this book is a little hint at the city of God. There is no non-Christian culture that's even done 10% as much art or music anywhere near as beautiful as Christianity. It just doesn't exist. If you know of it, let me know. Put it in the comments. I'd be happy to look it up. Christianity just inspires magnificent painting and art. In a sense, it's the idea of God the Creator created us. We're created in the image of the Creator. Therefore, we should be creators too. And what can we do to glorify and honor God? And when you do that, you start thinking beyond yourself, beyond just you and your family, and it inspires you to beautiful artistic achievements. That's why Christianity has generated the best art, the best literature, the best architecture, the best sculpture. Okay, the next one is the painting of St. Augustine's Vision by the Seaside. This painting by Benvenuto Tisi, 1520. And so St. Augustine was by the seaside, and he saw a boy scooping water from the sea and putting it into a hole. And he said, why are you doing this? That's impossible. Because the boy said he wanted to put the entire sea into the hole. And then the boy said to him, I will sooner be able to do this, put the sea into this hole, than you will be able to understand all the mysteries of God with your limited understanding. And so I jokingly said the point of that was that holistic study of epidemiology and comparative anatomy in comparison with the current standard of reductionist research would be what we need to do, other than trying to recreate the work of God through supplements. So what I'm basically saying is the holistic natural state of understanding, like of Adam and Eve and all that, towards what's right for humans, is much more effective, Genesis 1:29, than is the modernist idea that we can do everything with drugs and supplements. Okay, a couple good quotes by Augustine. Wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it. Right is right, even if no one is doing it. The problem of a response to evil is not to return evil, but to transcend it. The key question is, what is the use to which you will put your suffering? How will you transcend it? So I like both of those quotes, because I've had times when people are being really nasty to me. And what I try to do is I try to just not take it too personally and be really nice and hopefully become friends with the person. I'd rather be friends with a person. And that often is an effective strategy. It depends on the situation, of course. But I have seen in many instances that works well in a lot of social situations. If the person's just a hopeless jerk, then yeah, you can't be friends with them. You just stay away from them. The key question is what, and some people you do have to do something back mean to them because otherwise they won't leave you alone. But quite often this ends up being the best way. I have a lot of experience. I'm an old man. I'm 60 years old. I know from experience that a lot of times the person's hurt, offended, or just kind of stupid. And if you just be nice to them, you can often end up being friends with them. And it's much better for both of you in the long run. And I like this question too. The key is to what use will you put your suffering? How will you transcend it? Because that's also the fact. We all have a lot of suffering and disappointments in life. And if you just end up bitter or hopeless, where does that get you? Versus if you sort of take your sadness and frustration about one problem and you let that energize you by putting it into something else, you can make something out of it. And that's a little bit like the Alfred Adler inferiority principle of compensation. And that can be a good, effective way to go through life. It's what I do. Okay, we're going to leave it there for today in our paintings. I usually do about 10 pages a day. So hope that was interesting.